Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of The Lion, the Way, and the War, where we discuss Jesus, His church, and the spiritual battle that surrounds us. I'm Craig Allison, and I'll be your host. Most of you will know today's guest, David Schonhoff. He is the pulpit minister at Central Church of Christ in Chattanooga, Tennessee. David has been married to his wife, Melanie, for about 45 years, and they have two lovely daughters. One's a nurse, one's an attorney, I believe. His oldest daughter has two children, so David is also a granddad, which I know is one of his favorite jobs.
Absolutely.
Right now. Yeah. David graduated from Freed-Hardeman back in 1876. 1976 with a degree. I've got 18, I just typo here. 1976 with a degree in Bible and a Master's of Religion from Harding University in 1979 with a focus on missions. You were a soldier in Vietnam, and I have reason to believe that one of your hobbies that you enjoy is painting. So
that's true.
Just a little bit about
Sometimes
you.
it's just house painting, but I like oil painting instead of actual pictures to do.
I've seen some in your office, so I know that you would enjoy that. How you doing today?
I'm doing good. Real good.
Thanks for joining me.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here and always to be with you and visit with you in any way we can.
So the main reason I wanted to have you as a guest in this podcast is to get some inside information from the perspective of a preacher and a teacher who is trying to minister to a congregation during a time really unlike anything that you or I have ever experienced. I don't think in your lifetime, at least, the church has ever had to close its doors for an extended period of time. Here we are in the midst of a global pandemic. We have growing unrest across the United States regarding race relations. That's led to protest and now riots with cities being burned and people are being killed and are dying. There's continuing restrictions on our civil liberties and freedoms. And I'm not trying to be pessimistic here, but these are the realities right now. So as a minister, trying to calm fears, restore hope, and keep people focused on Christ, I'll start with this question here with all those things in mind. What's been the hardest thing for you personally during this time?
That's a difficult question.
Well, none of my questions are going to be easy, David.
Come on. I thought I'd do a softball here to start with. Well, let me just back up and say something. As you were giving your presentation interview here, it was interesting that just a couple days ago, my wife and I were in our garage, and we were just wading through a multitude of junk and materials, etc., that we've saved over the years. And she ran into a newspaper or magazine that on one page had the discussion about landing on the moon, and you've turned the page to the next part of the magazine, and it was talking about riots and buildings being burned, etc. And this is in the 60s. Mm-hmm. And I'm thinking, wow, I don't know if things really are any different than what we had back when I was a teenager.
Interesting.
So, but how it's impacted me, and it definitely wants me to just go about as much as I can presenting the security that we have in Christ. Because the world is falling apart as far as we're concerned. Mm-hmm. Politics and all of that stuff has influenced my desires to make trips to Nicaragua, which I've done on frequency. Well, the Nicaragua politics have been a mess for some time, but particularly the last couple of years. So that's stifled that action, which really, I guess, feeds my good spirituality, keeps my focus, I think, going in a good direction as just a minister, even stateside. So then all of those things have caused us to further close in with the issues of COVID particularly and staying at home. And my goal is to remind people that God is still running things. We just don't see that because we're not together to see one another face to face. But this isn't surprising to God. He's watched this thing coming up since day one.
Yeah. So, nice sidestep of the question there. I'm not going to let you get
Go
out
ahead.
of it because you talked about that's your goal, and I think that is a thing as from a minister standpoint would be definitely a goal for you personally. Though, what has been the hardest thing about this? How I guess how is it impacting you as a minister?
It has, probably to the surprise of some people, given me an extra amount of things to do just to be able to minister to people. That word minister is kind of an odd-shaped figure as itself, to reach out, to communicate, to encourage, to build up and all that while you're staying in your home. And the learning how to produce lessons on my phone, tie that into Facebook, to be made aware that there are actually a large number of people that are out there really anxious to see that. And so I started out with the desire to try to do this in a minor way, and it's become a major part of my ministry, even though we are meeting now on Sunday mornings. It's still, a lot of people are anxious to hear the short or the longer lessons that I put on Facebook. That's caused an extra amount of weight to my life, but also a great deal of pleasure knowing that what's going on out there is actually being taken in.
Actually, you kind of beat me to the punch here. One of the questions I had is had there been or are there any major changes or modifications to the way you engage the congregation? And certainly, you're describing something that you've never really had to address or deal with before, which is reaching a population of people through other means than standing in front of them in a physical setting, in a corporate setting. And your generation, and really my generation too, but I know for you the technology piece of it has not come as natural as it would to say somebody our kids' age. So I know that's been a challenge because it's a challenge for me. Just and I'm a little bit younger than you are.
Yeah.
So
You're kind.
I didn't graduate. I didn't graduate college in 1876.
Right.
So
neither did I. But anyway, but knowing it was out there was a good thing, and through the help of a lot of good people that do those things, I was made aware of how to go about doing it, learned the technology, made a lot of errors, still am, but encouraged that when it's getting out there. You had said something here, jogged my memory now because of my age. I'm forgetting what I was headed toward here, but the idea of you facing that moment where we realized we weren't going to be meeting the next Sunday or any time during the week.
Yeah.
You and I both talked about that together, Craig, and you said, I'm going to start a podcast. And I thought, I've heard of those. And I said, I'm going to try putting some things on Facebook. And at the same time, both of us said, we've got to do something.
Yeah.
We saw that as people of God, that there was still a ministry that had to go on and could go on. And thank God that all that was available. I can't imagine what the early church did in surviving, not having technology available. But these podcasts, and I've listened, not all of them, but I've listened to some of yours, and it's interesting that there's a lot of people that are tuned in to what's going on, and people maybe that didn't look at Facebook before, or maybe they did, but a large number of people. So I'm putting out lessons, and I kind of pledged to myself, I'm going to do Sunday's lesson, and then when church started back up, I still continue on a lesson on Mondays, then on Tuesdays a devotional thought, then a Wednesday lesson, Thursdays I'll take off, and Friday I've got a lesson, and then Sunday morning before church services I stick something else on just to kind of prime the pump for the people before they go to worship to think about God before they get there. And just the awareness of God, making people stay in tune with that in the midst of them going through the crisis, like all of us are, in so many different ways.
Yeah, I think for a lot of people, especially those of us that are in the ministry that maybe did not rely on technology so much, it has put us. It certainly with the podcast, it's put me out of my comfort zone because this is a format that was not familiar with before, and I approached it from the standpoint, maybe you did too, thinking about the Apostle Paul. If he was living today, I would imagine that he would probably take advantage of every possible way to get the gospel out to people. So, my reticence, my stubbornness, or resistance to not embrace this kind of fell on, a foundation that didn't really have a foundation.
Right.
I couldn't have an excuse not to do it. So, let me ask you this: you're talking about we've started back on Sunday mornings, and if you're following along with the news, there's an increase now in COVID cases, and just we had kind of a timeline thinking about we would transition into Sunday morning, and then we'd add the classes back in, and then Sunday night, and then maybe further down the road we'd add that midweek service. And now we're in this mode or train of thought here that is looking at keeping it just the Sunday morning gathering together. So I want to ask this question: what long-term impacts, if this continues for an extended period of time, what long-term impacts do you see, not just to Central Church of Christ, but let's even talk about cross-denominational. Just every church out there is facing similar situations. Long-term impacts of people coming back into the corporate worship if and when these restrictions are lifted.
That scares me to even think that direction. Not thinking just in the U.S., but we have been in communication with people in India that we support, and I have visited there a couple times, not as much as a few others in our congregation who have encouraged that. And so I visualize what it's like to walk down that little narrow paved road to get to the church building, a complex as they call it, and seeing pictures where there's a large barrier up and it says closed. And the people, we think of being shut in our homes of I can't get out except when I'm supposed to go to the grocery store only, and I have to have a legitimate excuse. And that was the way it was at the very beginning of the COVID situation, where I don't know that they're allowed to get out of their homes. And they're far more disabled, tied in than we are. That's one area. Nicaragua, I don't know if they're getting the right communication. The government tells the people in certain zones in India, you're shut in. You have to stay this way for 2 weeks. Good luck. Nicaragua is kind of the opposite. They totally deny there's any problem, although they know people that have died from COVID. It's described as a heart attack or something different by the local authorities, so they can produce to the world that they're surviving and not having problems.
Yeah.
But we're making it, and that idea of how it's going to impact long range, I don't know. I'm in anguish over that and thinking that will people lose their faith? I don't think so. Will some get used to just staying at home? I don't think that, because I think they're anxious to get out. I think it has caused all of us to be grateful for what we used to have and hungering and thirsting to have it again. I guess we'll just have to wait and see on how all that turns out.
Yeah. You mentioned, people, they're used to staying at home, and this idea of, home churches, which is certainly, that's a biblical concept in the New Testament. You had churches meeting in homes, certainly. But obviously the dynamics of that over the centuries have changed, where church homes are not as common as the buildings with the larger group of members coming together. So we've had this break in the way we do church. I'm using air quotes here.
Right.
And we've had to rearrange and restructure the way we've done it. We've pulled in several different mediums, and you've mentioned the sermons being broadcast on YouTube when no one could meet. So we're at homes watching via electronic format to worship at home, and I'm trying to think of a way to put this. People have gotten used to that and like it. There's a feeling of, this is way more convenient. I don't have to get in the car and drive all the way to church. I can stay in my pajamas if I want to. And so this very, not lazy or lackadaisical, but just a much more homey kind of feel. And people do their service and they're done for the day, and that's it. So that's kind of the thinking behind that question, long-term effects when and hopefully soon we are back to whatever you want to call normal, where we can come together without the restrictions. If churches, not just Central again, but churches lose a portion of their membership to just say, you know what, we've done home church for so long and we like it better, we're just going to keep doing this. Is that a fear that you think most ministers are thinking about, and church leaders for that matter? This extends beyond just the ministry.
I would think definitely across the board, from all religious groups. One of the things that I have been able to unintentionally research is as the COVID thing had us all shut in our homes for quite a while, and the temperature was pretty reasonable outside. A lot of people have taken to walking around the streets and exercising or whatever in our neighborhood. And so I've gotten to know my neighbors and chatted with them over a variety of different things, but a lot of them have asked me, how are things at Central? Mm-hmm. And I'll say, well, it's doing okay, and we're still doing lessons online, and a couple of them were in charge of the finances in their churches and their religious groups. Mm-hmm. And they said, well, how is that going? I said, well, it's doing well. I was really proud that Central stepped up. It didn't surprise me. I just felt like that's Central. Mm-hmm. But you could see the shock on their faces, like, oh, we've dropped down to nothing. Our ministers have had to quit and go do other things. And so how's that impacted the church? I think people are going to settle in and do pretty much nothing if they can get away with it, but maybe they didn't have much going for them except more of a formal ritual in their life. Maybe it was occasional, maybe it was regular, I don't know. But for us that have had this, as James calls it, pure and undefiled religion, it's in me. Mm-hmm. It's not just something that I do because of a ritual. I think there's going to be a permanency that's going to be embedded in there that will last anything that we have. So I think those are going to keep on. And we've got to be aware that God is fully aware of what's going on, complicit, I don't know, but there are plans that we can figure out that He would like us to be doing that could make this even greater after it's over with, if we'll just plug in and use those things. So this isn't going to thwart God's plan. It can be an actual aid to it if we just have our eyes open and be mindful of what would God want to do right here, instead of just being discouraged or saying, oh, we're going to start back at zero. Well, no, wait a minute. What's God up to here that can improve what we've done as Christians? Our personal faith, our commitment to that, and I think even to the outreach of other people that we may cross paths with that we wouldn't have done if this hadn't have taken place.
That brings up, to me, something that's worth stopping and thinking about and contemplating. Not that you and I are going to come up with some definitive answer here of, this is the best way to do it or not the best way to do it. But, through this all, it's really, for me personally, it's made me stop and think about the fellowship aspect of corporate worship. Beyond the point of coming together and worshiping God, which is the primary reason. But you read the passage. Hebrews now means a lot more to me. Where the section there that talks about not forsaking the assembly, and for me that's always been like one of those legalistic type of things. When the church doors are open, you have to be there just because. And
but there's so much more to that passage. That's the whole thing. It gives you the why,
right?
Because you're to be there, spurring on one another.
That's my point.
That's done personally when you're with people, or somehow And we could do that through our technology, even at that.
Yeah. So that it kind of begs the question, is there, now that we've kind of been forced into a position of understanding the meaning behind that scripture, that aspect of coming together and spurring each other on, encouraging each other, being there for that fellowship, that bond that unifies the church, so to speak. Is it time that the church looks at the way we do church, that somehow, and I'm just kind of like speaking here as the thoughts come to my mind, not so much as we have to come here and we have to do this 3 times a week just because that's the way we've always done it, that's the way tradition is. The idea, maybe I can sum this up as saying quality over quantity. Going forward, whatever the new normal looks like, do we as a church need to look at how we do the corporate church as far as the quality of it? And if we're forced into a situation where we can't come back on a midweek service, or we can't come back on a Sunday night service, that we look at this from the aspect of, while we are together, we're gonna really look at some aspects of our worship that, honestly, we haven't really had to look at before now.
I think a major part of this is in appreciating what you have when you have that togetherness. And you can be present and it not mean anything, or it can mean absolutely everything. Think about the perspective of how this all came about to start with, that we meet 3 times a week. And I'll bet that this tradition of doing it more than just on Sunday morning grew out of stress and struggles and trials that people were going through way back, problems that they had with the financial situations and stuff at the turn of 2 centuries ago now. And it grew out of, I need my brethren. Yeah. And so they started meeting more often out of that. And we, from our perspective, in this day and time, look at that, oh, that's just a tradition. But they did that because it was so vital for them to survive as a Christian. They needed that. Mm-hmm. And then we come into it in our era, oh, it's just a ritual, and we've taken it for granted. Some of the most joyous moments become more about me and I didn't get what I wanted, or whatever might happen, or just you got your mind somewhere else. You're driving to church, but you're not thinking about when I'm going to go do and who I'm going to go meet and who needs encouraging. You're more like, okay, I've got to check this off the list because when I get home, I've got school for the kids, or I've got this job to be done, and we have too much stuff on our plate mm-hmm. that conflicts with us getting the opportunity of being together. So we miss out on it, and we ignore, I think, the potential of using it for an opportunity to help others. And so it becomes stale, mm-hmm. Like an old piece of toast. It's there, but it's just not the same as the fresh stuff mm-hmm. that's all oozing over with butter and jelly and everything. We need to recognize what we had and get back to using that for God's great opportunity to strengthen one another. Because I think that's why it was built to start with. We didn't realize what was been handed to us.
I know that there's a lot of churches that I've looked at, I was going to say up north, but here in the South too, where they, instead of coming back multiple times, for me, and I was talking to somebody earlier in the week, for me personally, on when things were normal, I'm driving 2 hours on Sundays combined.
Yeah.
Everything, twice back and forth. And I'm about half an hour away. So here 30 minutes, back 30 minutes, and then again for the night service. And that's, to me, wasted time, wasted money. There are churches that have moved now into rather, you come together and you have your Sunday worship, but it's extended. And so you stay longer. You have the fellowship. You have that, I guess, re-injecting into it what you were talking about, so it's not stale. The reason you're coming together in times of stress and times of trial, you're spending enough time in one setting, in one place, where you're making better use of your time at one setting. Is that something that you think is going forward that might happen to the church, that we re-envision the traditional thing of, well, yes, you come here, we're here briefly Sunday morning, then you go home, and then you stop and you come back that night, and it's brief and it's quick, and you go home, and it's just like, what did I get out of that?
Well, if we race back in Sunday night to hurry to do whatever, to go back home and leave with the thought, well, what did I get out of that? We probably won't get much. Whatever the opportunity is, if you decide you're going to stay the whole time and you're primed for that, your mind says, I've got this opportunity, who's going to be there? And our mind is set toward the idea of, I'm going to spur one another on, to build up one another. And that's what that Hebrew passage says. That's the goal of getting together. It's amazing that the Ephesians passage talks about what God kept doing for us. He raised us up, made us alive, but it kept using the word together, continually. And I think there's a togetherness that's extremely vital. But anyway, so if whether we go and come back or we just stay, if we have a goal in mind of when I'm headed there, or early in the morning of, this is an opportunity. There's people who have been sick during the week, and these people are going to come to church. What can I do? Are there people that have been depressed? And there's some that are at that more regular than others. These people, we have this in mind. When I get there, this is who I've got to go see. Make sure that they have the attention they need. Not only are we ministering to those people, serving, helping, blessing, taking care of, building up, but it comes back to us. So our time is not wasted, even if it's a 30-minute drive. I remember the drives when the kids were young, and Melanie and I were discussing on the way to church. Okay, now when we get to church, there's this person, and even some little kids. Now, if you see this little child here, they've not got to come in a while, so you make sure you go up and speak to them. And if we are attentive to those things, as opposed to always going to the same ones we go to see because they're our best friends, and those are good, don't want to take away from those, but be mindful of those that aren't, how much stronger our fellowship will be. And that was a key factor in making the church strong in the first century in Acts chapter 2:42. They were steadfast in the apostles' doctrine, and the next word, as in fellowship, right there along with it, and then breaking bread and prayers.
Yeah, and that was something that they were doing on a daily basis too.
They did. So it may not have been the whole church, but they kept getting with people.
Yeah,
and we have that potential with all the electronic gadgets that are out there to do that. And those that will not be listening to this podcast because they're of even an older era, they need some attention. But no cards, little things like that are lasting things. It's amazing to go into a hospital room or a nursing home or something like that, and you'll see a card that someone sent. It's been up there for 2 months, but that meant something. Now, who keeps an email or a text that's been sent 2 months ago? I mean, nobody does, because we get those regularly. Yeah. But those are lasting things for these people that build up.
Yeah, interesting to talk about. I'm going to switch gears here for a second. I know a lot of preachers and ministers are doing everything they possibly can to feed the congregation. And obviously, I'm not talking about physical food. Right. They're pouring into their members to feed them spiritually, to encourage them, and to help keep them from slipping into despair. I know that's come up several times. I know that you've probably dealt with some members that are struggling in those ways. So I guess the question: how do you, David? How do you stay positive yourself? Because who's pouring into you?
My relationship with my wife and my Lord. And moments like when you and I get together, which aren't enough, or getting with just some other Christians. Those are all things. And it's not a brag, it's a need I have. I'm addicted to getting up and being with God in the morning. Mm-hmm. It feeds my need. So I preached on a long time ago about it ought to be the first thing we do in the morning. And then I looked out at the class that I was teaching at that time, and I said, I admitted, raised my hand. I said, I don't do that. I said, but I'm starting tonight. And so it's that first thing in the morning to remind me of who's in charge, and I just have a very casual conversation with God and say, I'm ready for the day, Lord, if you'll walk with me, and try to make sure that whatever comes up, that I handle it in a good way. Not everything has been positive along the way, but God can take a lot of things and turn them around in a very good way if we'll just let Him have the time that He plans on it needing in order to develop the right way.
My final questions, and I'll give you an opportunity here too to just add any other comments or questions you want to. But my final question for you, David, is what do you hope to see out of all of this when we get on the other side of it? What is your vision of the church post COVID, post all of the social unrest and everything else that's going on right now?
Stronger, more unified, more aware of what God has given us in our fellowship, that makes us invincible to Satan and gives us a more servant attitude with eyes open to do whatever God wants.
David, thank you for sitting down with me and spending some time talking about some of these topics. Especially, I think it's valuable to hear your perspective on it. I'm not sure if people stop to think about the position of our preachers and our ministers across the brotherhood and what they're dealing with. If you haven't, I think it bears mentioning that the closing of our churches has impacted our nation's ministers in ways that I don't think can be fully expressed, understood even, or appreciated by non-ministerial families. And I'm not saying that as a slam or as an indictment. It's just you don't get what it's like to be a minister unless you've walked in those shoes. There's this deep sense of self-identity. Seriously, the fact is that most preachers are in the ministry because it's a calling. And I'm speaking from personal experience. It's not just, I'm not a layman out here just saying this stuff to make you feel good or anything like that. And growing up as a preacher's kid, also I saw this firsthand. To be a preacher requires sacrifice on a scale that simply I don't think is appreciated, or unless you've walked in those shoes, you can appreciate it. Like I said, it's not a glamorous job. It's often a thankless one, but that doesn't matter to the preacher because it's truly a calling. It's a passion to serve. It's a passion to save other people's souls. To stand before a congregation and preach God's word every week to ministers, to minister to the members, to embrace them in times of sadness and grief, in times of joy, in times of celebration, to hold the hand of a beloved member that you've known all your life as they pass away, to share in a family's most intimate moments. These are things that a lot of people don't see, that are intangible treasures, that are the essence of what being a minister of God's word entails. It is who a preacher is, and underscore is, I think, capital I-S. And, that's been taken away from our preachers. A piece of their heart has been cut out. And so I would like everyone that's listening to this today, that hears this podcast, to take a moment out of their week, out of their day, and earnestly pray for our preachers. Pray for their strength. Pray for their courage. Ask God to pour into their souls in abundance, because I can guarantee you that there are large chunks, large pieces that are missing. And as optimistic as David is today, I think he's being brave and being kind and being a little bit reserved, because I know David pretty well, and I know that it's tough to endure when such a large piece of the identity of the minister is taken away from him so suddenly. Those are just some ramblings here at the end that I'd like to encourage our listeners to think about and to pray for our preachers. And David, know that I am praying for you every day.
I do appreciate that. I remember Dr. Philip Slate, who taught a vast majority of the mission classes that I took at Harding Graduate School, that would continually say that a missionary needs to be flexible above all. And he talked about preparation and all. And that's by and large a good thing for a minister in any time, in times like this too.
Yeah.
But also for a Christian. We have to realize that God's not always going to leave everything exactly the same way. So the question is, what does he want us to do now? And so I am optimistic, you bet, because I feel like there's still a lot to be done out there. And so, as I said years ago to the Lord when I was starting my first Sunday morning here at Central, I got up Saturday night and looked out at the stars, and I said, okay, God, what do you want? And so we should start at least every so often with that in mind, and that prayer that, what are you up to, God, and what way do you want to use me? And be optimistic, because he's up to something. If we'll just engage in that and trust him, I think we'll be useful. Will everything be glorified and perfect? No. Do I need prayers? You bet. Always. All of us do.
Yeah.
But just have your eyes open for what God wants and do it.
Absolutely. David, I appreciate your optimism too. That I think that means a lot to so many people. Okay, next week we're gonna talk to Dustin Humphreys. Dustin is part of the congregation at St. Elmo. He works with the young professionals and does some ministry work there with them. And he's going to bring a perspective into this to a demographic that I haven't talked about yet that I'm excited to talk about. As always, if you've got comments about this podcast, if you have suggestions on how we can make it better, if there's something specific that you want to hear about, feel free to shoot us a text, a comment on the different platforms that we broadcast this show on. Our final thoughts: you mentioned missionaries being flexible, David. Romans chapter 10, verses 14 and 15. How then will they call on him in whom they have not believed? And how are they to believe in him of whom they have not heard? And how are they to hear without someone preaching? And how are they to preach unless they are sent? As it is written, how beautiful are the feet of those who preach the good news. Be kind to everybody, and until next week, be blessed, be safe, and be loving and kind to one another.